If the skyscraper was born in New York, it was perfected in Chicago. When fire destroyed a mostly wooden city, a group of architects created a new townscape based on the iron frame, multi-story building. The best of these was Louis Sullivan, who took the multi-story building to new aesthetic heights, transforming the ethos of American building with structures like the Carson Peary Scott department store. Bones and skin. Sullivan expressed the rectangular module of the grid on the outside of the store. He let the whole structural basis show. But part of his genius was that he didn't confine the meaning of his buildings to their skeleton, as would happen in the 20th century. He said that form follows function, but he was also a brilliant detailer, and his decoration was very inventive. The swirls of iron on Carson Peary Scott remind you that Sullivan also had his roots in the Beaux-Arts tradition of Paris, but he reinvented it as American. Meanwhile, other architects were using the Beaux-Arts style to create structures of almost incredible congested opulence and excess, an architecture of privilege for the new barons of the industrial North. William Vanderbilt, railroads. J.P. Morgan, trusts. Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick, steel. The Astors, the Goulds. They built dream palaces for themselves along Fifth Avenue and on the shore of Newport, Rhode Island, their summer retreat. They called them cottages, vast eclectic affairs that seemed ridiculous to satirists even then. This was the time when Americans finally lost their Puritan inhibitions about the display of surplus wealth against a background of strikes, lockouts, political corruption, and virtual class war. It was the Gilded Age. The super-rich lived tax-free and could spend limitless amounts to cover their untidy social origins. Europe was the key. They married their daughters off to impoverished European aristocrats. They collected European art.
If you look up above you, we have another beautiful ceiling up here. The motif here are the four seasons. Again, this entire room was all designed and constructed in France, only to be dismantled to be brought over here for reassembly with its original cabinet makers. This is my favorite room. I just love the colors and the textures here in this room, and I love to imagine running in and flopping on the sofa after a hard day.
Ordinary folk try to imagine how the rich live, but more to the point, so do the rich, especially in America, and they do it all the time. Let's say your name is Vanderbilt and you own half the country. It's easy to say to someone, my good man, I own half America. But the real test is whether you can behave like someone who does. And for this, a rich man needs help. Real American wealth in the 1880s is still pretty much uncharted territory, like the Rockies in the 1780s. Suppose you wake up one morning with an idea and you say to yourself, by God, I shall have a cottage by the sea, and in that cottage there will be a dining room with a ceiling 45 feet high and the walls sheathed in rose alabaster the colour of rare steak. You still may get it wrong because your next-door neighbours who own the other half of America may have just finished panelling their dining room in marble the colour of poached fish. So you must get an architect to fantasize on your behalf, secure in the knowledge that because he is working for practically everybody else in your class, he won't get his symbols crossed. He will maintain a seamless etiquette of shared ostentation, with variance, as here. The chief architect of the plutocrats of Newport was Richard Morris Hunt, the most honoured architect in America, the Bernini of the Gilded Age. This house, the Breakers, is the biggest of all the Newport cottages. He built it in 1893 for Cornelius-Vanderbilt-II. It has 70 rooms and is in the style of a 17th century Baroque Genoese palace. People spoke of an American Renaissance, and there was, not least because America was buying the Renaissance. The great obsession of the Gilded Age was acquiring the trophies of a grander and more aristocratic Europe. If your family tree was a bit stubby or twisted, try that of the Medici. By collecting, you showed and reinforced your cultural confidence. It was J.P. Morgan whose name stuck to this process of wholesale collecting, Morganism. His library in New York was a treasure house of manuscripts, paintings, sculpture, drawings, enamels, jewellery, books. In the 1880s and 1890s, enormous art collections began to pile up in New York, Boston, Chicago, and today no one can study the Italian Renaissance without going to America. Art collecting, moreover, was a field that rich women could enter as easily as rich men. Right through to the creation of the Museum of Modern Art, American women would have an immense effect on the formation of American museums. Mrs. Havemeyer, Mary Cassatt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. The first of these lionesses built this patio, not indeed in Venice, where most of its parts came from, but in Boston. For 20 years, she alternately scandalized and delighted Boston society. She smoked cigarettes, she drank beer, she dressed flamboyantly, and she collected art on a large scale. She was known as Mrs. Jack, or to give her proper moniker, Isabella Stewart Gardner. Mrs. Gardner was tough, generous, and a Democrat. She built a palace named Fenway Court in Boston and turned it into a public museum, free and open to everyone. Some of the more idealistic Bostonians felt it would come to act as a sort of spiritual clinic where discontented working people could assuage their resentments in the presence of great art. This socially therapeutic idea would hover behind the American Museum from then on. Unfettered lust for objects, overlaid with moral and educational idealism and pepped up with more than a hint of the department store, created the peculiar temple known as the American Museum. Gradually, across America, the museum began to replace the church as the focus of civic worship for the middle classes. The poor man Mrs. Jack did most to help, though, was a young and ferociously ambitious Jewish scholar from Boston, Bernard-Berenson. She sponsored him. He became her mentor, and he turned into the most feared and respected expert on the Italian Renaissance. Collectors came to I Tatti, his house in the hills outside Florence, as people had once made the pilgrimage to visit Goethe in Weimar. His books and lists defined the canon, and he negotiated the swamps of conflict of interest very nimbly, for Berenson was not just a scholar but an art dealer, getting a kickback of 25% on the sale price of every picture he authenticated. The wily little Berenson played Mrs. Jack like a salmon, flattering her outrageously and coaxing her into ambition, sacrifice, and acquisition. In 1896, he persuaded her to buy a painting for the unheard-of sum of $100,000. It was a Titian, but not just a Titian, one of the master's greatest efforts, The Rape of Europa, showing the abduction of the nymph by Jupiter in the form of a white bull. Mrs. Gardner temporised and she hesitated, but in the end she gave in and she sent Berenson a coded telegram reading, YEUP, yes to Europa. Yoop? Sweet surrender. And now the mass migration of paintings across the Atlantic began in earnest. But buying art was only one credential. In any age, the great and the good want to be remembered by portraiture, and the new Van Dyck of the Gilded Age was the man who painted Mrs. Jack herself, overcoming her cosmetic problem of a hair lip by portraying her as an exotic Eastern goddess with a girdle of pearls. His name was John-Singer-Sargent. Here he is in this